It was just another morning in Atlanta. Crowded streets, tired faces, and a man named Dr. Marcus Reed walking through it all. But in less than a minute, his life would take a turn he never expected. The morning sun stretched over Atlanta, painting the skyline in shades of gold and rose. Dr. Marcus Reed stood at his window, gazing out at the city that had both embraced and challenged him. The weight of his journey often pressed against his chest in quiet moments like this, when the hustle of hospital corridors and the hum of medical machinery faded into silence. His path was not one written in ease or privilege, but in resilience, sacrifice, and the constant tug-of-war between duty and self. Marcus grew up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, where opportunities felt scarce but dreams were abundant. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide, her tired hands still finding the strength to prepare dinner and check his homework. His father, a bus driver, often reminded him that hard work wasn't a choice but a necessity. Money was always tight, but love was never absent. From a young age, Marcus understood that education was not just his ticket out. It was his weapon against the cycle that trapped so many around him. As a boy, Marcus spent hours buried in borrowed books, fascinated by the intricate systems of the human body. While other kids played ball in the street, he sat on the porch with a flashlight, tracing diagrams of organs and veins. His friends teased him, calling him Doc long before he ever earned the title. Deep down, Marcus carried both the sting of their laughter and the quiet power of vision that seemed too far for most to grasp. High school brought its own trials. Marcus was bright, but brightness in his neighborhood often painted a target. He was ridiculed for speaking proper, for carrying a backpack heavy with science texts instead of sneakers. At times, he questioned whether chasing medicine was worth the isolation it brought. But every time his resolve wavered, his mother's weary smile reminded him why he kept going. She told him, "Son, we may not have much, but you've been given a gift. Don't hide it. Use it." With relentless determination, Marcus earned a scholarship to Emory University. The transition was jarring. He walked into lecture halls filled with students from wealthy families, their confidence polished in prep schools and private tutors. Marcus often felt like an outsider, a poor kid from the South Side, wearing thrift store clothes among peers who drove luxury cars. He battled imposter syndrome daily, questioning whether he truly belonged in those pristine halls. But Marcus worked. He studied harder than anyone, often staying in the library until closing, then returning at dawn. He juggled part-time jobs while balancing demanding coursework, fueled by the belief that his family's sacrifices could not be in vain. Each exam passed, each lab completed, felt like one step closer to rewriting his story. And theirs, medical school in Atlanta, was no less grueling. The long nights, the constant exhaustion, the emotional toll of watching patients suffer, it tested every fiber of his being. There were days Marcus wanted to quit, when the burden of loans and the weight of expectations threatened to break him. Yet, he pressed forward. For every patient who looked at him with hope in their eyes, for every child who reminded him of his younger self, he found the strength to keep moving. Still, success carried a price. Marcus's relentless pursuit of medicine meant missed birthdays, strained friendships, and relationships that faded under the pressure of his schedule. He carried guilt for not being present, for placing his ambition above personal connections. In quiet moments, loneliness echoed louder than applause. He had earned the respect of his colleagues, but often wondered who truly knew him beyond the white coat and stethoscope. By the time Marcus became a practicing doctor in Atlanta, he had built a reputation for excellence, compassion, and resilience. Patients trusted him not just for his skill, but for the way he listened, truly listened to their fears and hopes. To them, he wasn't just Dr. Reed. He was a man who understood, who carried the memory of every, but even in achievement, Marcus wrestled with a haunting truth. Success had not erased the struggles that shaped him, The memory of eviction notices, the sound of his mother's weary sighs, the quiet humiliation of being overlooked. They lingered, shadows that no title could banish. His accomplishments shone brightly, yet beneath them lived scars invisible to most. At night, when the city lights blinked outside his apartment window, Marcus often sat in stillness, replaying the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the boy with the flashlight on the porch, the young man mocked for dreaming too big, the student who fought through exhaustion to prove he belonged. He realized that every version of himself still lived within him, whispering both doubts and encouragement. And though he had climbed far, Marcus knew the climb was not only for him. It was for his parents, who sacrificed comfort for his education. It was for his neighborhood, where too many dreams were silenced before they began. It was for every young black boy who dared to believe that his worth extended beyond the stereotypes imposed upon him. Hardship into the room, and used it as fuel for empathy. The path of Dr. Marcus Reed was not one of unbroken triumph. It was a mosaic of victories and wounds, laughter and loneliness, faith and fear. And in the quiet of his Atlanta apartment, with the weight of his white coat hanging nearby, he carried it all, not as a burden but as proof that resilience could carve light out of darkness, that sacrifice could yield legacy, and that even in a world designed to doubt him, he had risen. The months that followed were some of the most grueling of Marcus's life. He had achieved what many only dream of, but the higher he climbed, the lonelier the view became. Every morning, he pulled on his white coat, adjusted his stethoscope, and looked in the mirror at a man carrying the expectations of an entire community, an entire lineage. The hospital in Atlanta became his battlefield, a place where lives hung by a thread, and every decision could mean salvation or loss. And while he excelled under pressure, his spirit quietly cracked under its weight. He remembered the small apartment he rented near downtown, the hum of the city outside his window at night. Cars passed, horns blared, people laughed on sidewalks, but inside those four walls Marcus was silent, still detached. He often sat with the lights off, staring at nothing, listening to the echo of his own breathing. Sometimes he would pour himself a glass of water and just hold in his hands for minutes, reminding himself that he was alive, that he had a body, that he wasn't invisible. The success that looked golden on the outside felt like a cage on the inside. His patients adored him. His colleagues respected him. His family back home in Georgia bragged about him to everyone who would listen. But Marcus couldn't shake the truth that haunted him every night, that he was exhausted, that he was lonely, that he was giving everything and receiving nothing in return. He began to wonder if this was all there was. Was the dream worth the cost? Was saving lives enough to sustain his own? There were days when he sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart heavy. He wanted to drive away, to escape, to vanish into a different life where no one knew his name, where no one expected miracles from him. But instead, he always gathered himself, stepped out, and walked back into the fluorescent lights of the hospital, because that's who Marcus Reed was, a man who carried the weight even when it crushed him. But as the months turned into years, he began to lose pieces of himself. The laughter that once came so easily turned into polite smiles. The joy of saving lives turned into routine. He felt himself withdrawing, not from his duties, but from himself. And in that withdrawal, depression found him. It crept in quietly, like a shadow slipping under a door, until it sat with him at night and whispered in his ear that he was not enough, that he was alone, that he was running a race with no finish line. Marcus tried to fight it. He buried himself in work. He volunteered for extra shifts. He drowned his exhaustion in the endless needs of others. But no matter how many lives he saved, he couldn't rescue himself. And soon, even the brightest rooms in the hospital couldn't chase away the darkness in his mind. One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Marcus walked out of the hospital and sat on a bench across the street. The Atlanta skyline glowed in the distance, lights flickering against the night sky. He sat there for hours, still in his scrubs, hands clasped, head bowed. A security guard eventually approached him, asking if he was okay. Marcus looked up, forcing a smile, and said, "Yeah, just tired." But inside, he knew it was more than that. He was unraveling. He didn't tell anyone at first. Not his colleagues, not his family, not his friends. He carried the shame in silence, afraid that admitting his pain would shatter the image everyone held of him. A black man, a doctor, a symbol of achievement. How could he admit that he was drowning? How could he admit that the strong hands that healed others could not hold himself together? But the silence became unbearable. One night, sitting in his apartment with the city noise muffled behind his windows, Marcus finally broke. He cried, not the quiet, restrained tears he allowed himself on rare occasions, but deep, soul-wrenching sobs that shook his body. He wept for the boy he used to be, the boy who had dreamed of this life, the boy who never knew how lonely success could be. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that would change everything. He couldn't do it alone. He didn't want to. For the first time in his life, he admitted to himself that he needed help. That strength was not just carrying weight. It was knowing when to set it down. The next day, with trembling hands and a pounding heart, he reached out for therapy. It was not easy. The first session felt strange, uncomfortable, like peeling away layers of armor he had worn for decades. But slowly, week by week, he began to find pieces of himself again. He learned that his worth wasn't tied only to saving others, that his humanity mattered as much as his profession. He learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but a doorway to healing. Marcus also started talking more openly to those around him. He shared parts of his journey with colleagues, with family, with trusted friends. To his surprise, many of them admitted to their own struggles, their own nights of despair. And in that shared honesty, Marcus found community. He found connection. He was no longer carrying the burden alone. The hospital still demanded everything of him, but now he entered its halls with a lighter heart. He still had days of struggle, nights of doubt, but he also had tools, support, and the courage to speak his truth. The depression didn't vanish, but it no longer defined him. It was a part of his story, not the end of it. Years later, Marcus would reflect on that chapter of his life with both pain and gratitude. Pain for the nights he nearly lost himself. Gratitude for the strength it gave him. He understood now that success without self-care is hollow, that healing others begins with healing yourself. And so, he used his platform not just to practice medicine, but to advocate for mental health, especially among black men, especially among those taught to suffer in silence.